Lyka was known for her precision, for ending missions with a single shot. With piercing blue eyes and steady hands, she was a ghost on the battlefield, taking out targets without being seen. Her past was as complex as her reputation. Once a young girl who lost her family to war, she now used her skills to ensure no one else suffered the same loss. She had trained hard to become the elite sniper she was today. On this particular mission, her team was sent deep into enemy territory. Their goal: to rescue General Donovan, her commanding officer, who had been kidnapped by insurgents. The mission was critical. Not only was Donovan one of the best strategists in the army, but he was also like a father figure to her. In the distance, through the scope of her rifle, she could see her target, Jonathan Varela, the infamous enemy commander, holding General Donovan at gunpoint. Jonathan had become a ghost of her own nightmares, a rival commander whose name was whispered with a mix of fear and respect. This time, it was personal. She lined up her shot, heart pounding in her ears, but her hands remained steady. In her mind, she saw flashes of the devastation his forces had caused, people she'd lost, soldiers who would never return. A squeeze of the trigger, and it would all be over. But it wasn't hatred that drove her. It was duty. She pulled the trigger. The bullet flew through the air, hitting Jonathan's gun, sending it flying from his hand and grazing his shoulder. He staggered but remained alive, barely. Her team rushed in, guns blazing, and within moments, Donovan was free. But Lyka's eyes stayed on Jonathan as he was dragged off the battlefield, injured but alive. Something in his gaze unnerved her. It was as if he knew this wasn't the end. Back at the military base, Jonathan had been locked away in the high-security prison wing, awaiting interrogation. Lyka, despite her involvement in the mission, tried to distance herself. She didn't want to see him again. He was the enemy, a man who had caused so much pain, but fate had other plans. Her superior officer, knowing her skills and her history with Jonathan, ordered her to oversee the interrogations. At first, Lyka resisted. She wanted nothing to do with the man. But orders were orders, and soon she found herself standing outside Jonathan's cell, her rifle slung over her shoulder as she guarded him. Jonathan sat calmly, his eyes observing her, assessing her in the way only a seasoned commander could. Days passed in silence, but Lyka felt his presence like a weight on her chest every time she was near him. She knew she should hate him, despise him for everything he stood for, but something about him was unsettlingly human. On the fourth day, he finally spoke. "You could have killed me." Lyka didn't answer, her eyes fixed forward. "I've seen snipers like you. Never miss. You don't take prisoners, yet here I am. Why?" Lyka glanced at him, her expression guarded. "I don't kill without reason." Jonathan smirked. "Noble of you." "Unlike you," she shot back. He chuckled, a low sound that echoed in the cell. "You think you know me, but you don't." It wasn't the words themselves that got to her. It was the way he said them, the tone, the calmness. She expected anger, hostility. Instead, he seemed almost curious about her. It was unsettling, but for reasons Lyka couldn't yet understand. Interrogations continued for weeks, but Jonathan revealed little. He was a man of conviction, holding firm to his ideals, which made Lyka hate him even more. Still, as much as she despised him, she couldn't ignore the fact that every time they spoke, there was something beneath the surface, something unspoken. One night, while Lyka was off duty, a member of her team was injured during Jonathan's interrogation. Rumors spread that he was hiding something more valuable than they realized. Her commander called her in for a private briefing, revealing Jonathan's offer to share crucial intel in exchange for his life. "He's lying," Lyka said flatly, arms crossed over her chest. "He's a commander. He knows how to manipulate." The commander sighed. "He claims to have information about an upcoming attack. We can't risk ignoring it." Her heart twisted at the thought. Could Jonathan really hold the key to saving lives? Was he playing them, or was there something genuine behind his offer? After a long internal debate, she reluctantly agreed to give him a chance. Jonathan, in return for his release, provided intel on an impending enemy offensive that could have wiped out an entire battalion. His information was accurate, and the army was able to counter the attack, saving countless lives. Lyka didn't know whether to feel grateful or furious. Jonathan disappeared after his release, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. Months later, during another mission, Lyka's team was ambushed deep in enemy territory. Her squad was wiped out, and she was left stranded, trying to escape with limited supplies. Injured and alone, she sought refuge in an abandoned building on the outskirts of a war-torn city. That's when she saw him. Jonathan appeared like a ghost, slipping through the shadows, his expression as unreadable as ever. He was no longer with the insurgents, his once formidable uniform replaced by civilian clothes. He had gone rogue, but he wasn't her enemy anymore. At least, not directly. "You shouldn't be here," he said as he approached, crouching beside her. "And you shouldn't care," she retorted, pain evident in her voice. He looked at her for a long moment before offering his hand. "We both want the same thing now." Despite her instinct screaming to distrust him, Lyka took his hand. Together, they worked to escape the enemy's clutches. Forced to rely on one another, their shared danger drew them closer. The more time they spent together, the more Lyka's perception of Jonathan shifted. She saw glimpses of the man beneath the commander, someone driven by survival, but also by a desire for something more than war. As they navigated through enemy lines, Lyka's feelings for Jonathan grew. She fought against them at first, denying the emotions that bubbled up whenever he looked at her with those piercing, thoughtful eyes. But the more she tried to fight it, the more she realized how much she had changed since they first met. Jonathan, too, found himself drawn to Lyka. Her strength, her unwavering determination, and her ability to see past the enemy uniform he once wore captivated him. He admired her not only as a soldier, but as a woman who had faced incredible loss and come out stronger. One night, after narrowly escaping an ambush, they found shelter in a ruined safe house. Exhausted and wounded, they shared a quiet moment. Jonathan broke the silence, speaking softly, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "I've been fighting all my life, Lyka. I don't know how to stop, but with you maybe I can." Her heart raced. The war, their roles, their pasts, it all seemed insignificant in that moment. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand brushing against his. "We'll figure it out. Together." As their relationship blossomed, so did the challenges they faced. Both of their worlds seemed to reject their connection. Lyka's comrades viewed Jonathan with suspicion, unable to forgive his past actions, while Jonathan's former allies saw him as a traitor. Yet, through it all, they held on to each other, navigating the complexities of a relationship born out of conflict. Their love wasn't easy. It was a constant battle, but one they were both willing to fight for. As they stood side by side on the battlefield of love and war, they realized that what they had wasn't just a fleeting connection. It was something worth risking everything for. After their harrowing escape and the solidifying of their bond, Lyka and Jonathan returned to the base, only to be met with icy stares and whispers. Lyka's team can't accept that she's formed a relationship with a man who was once their greatest enemy. Her commanding officer calls her in, clearly unhappy. "Lieutenant Lyka, what do you think you're doing?" he demands, pacing the floor of his office. "This is the man who nearly cost us everything, and now I hear you're working with him?" Lyka stands her ground, her expression unwavering. "He gave us critical information that saved hundreds of lives. He's not the enemy anymore." But her commanding officer shakes his head, not convinced. "You're too close to this, Lyka. This is clouding your judgment." Outside, Jonathan waits, feeling the tension in the air. He knows all too well how difficult this will be for Lyka to navigate. He's been on the other side, in her shoes, and understands what it feels like to be betrayed by those you once called allies. The mistrust isn't something he can shake easily. Later that evening, as they sit together on the edge of the base, overlooking a distant mountain range, Jonathan turns to Lyka. "You don't have to keep defending me. I know it's tearing you apart inside." Lyka looks at him, her eyes softened by the setting sun. "I know what I'm doing, Jonathan. They just need to see you for who you are now, not who you used to be." She knows that convincing her unit won't be easy, but she's determined. Jonathan isn't just some enemy commander anymore. He's become more than that to her. He's her partner in this war and in life. Even as Lyka and Jonathan grow closer, there's an undercurrent of distrust among the soldiers. Rumors begin to spread that Jonathan is still working with the insurgents, that his escape from them was all a ruse to infiltrate the base. Lyka's best friend, Corporal Emma, approaches her one night, her face etched with concern. "Lyka, I've known you for years. We've been through hell and back together," Emma says, her voice low. "But I don't know if I can trust him. People are saying he's playing us." Lyka feels a pang of hurt, not because of Emma's words, but because of the growing rift between her and the people she's trusted with her life. She knows Jonathan isn't the enemy anymore, but how does she convince others of that? "It's not like that, Emma," Lyka replies, gripping her friend's arm. "Jonathan saved me. He could have let me die out there, but he didn't." Emma's face softens, but she still looks skeptical. "I hope you're right, but be careful. The higher-ups are watching you both closely." As tension mounts inside the base, Lyka realizes that her war is no longer just with the insurgents. It's with the people she's sworn to protect. She's fighting two battles, one with her comrades and one with the insurgents who still threaten their lives. Just when things start to stabilize, a shocking discovery shakes the foundation of trust within the base. Lyka uncovers evidence that someone has been leaking classified information to the insurgents. Worse, the trail seems to lead back to her own unit. Suspicion immediately falls on Jonathan. Her commanding officer confronts her in front of the entire squad. "You vouched for him, Lyka, and now look what's happened. We've been betrayed." Lyka, stunned and furious, turns to Jonathan. "Tell me you didn't." But before she can finish, Jonathan steps forward, his voice steady. "I didn't betray anyone, but I know who did." The room falls silent as Jonathan reveals that during his time as a commander, he had planted sleeper agents within enemy ranks. One of them, a soldier within Lyka's unit, has been feeding intel to the insurgents all along. Jonathan provides evidence, and it turns out that one of Lyka's trusted comrades, Corporal Reed, was the mole. The revelation shocks the entire base. Reed is arrested, but the damage is done. Lyka feels torn between relief and heartache. Jonathan had cleared his name, but at what cost? After Reed's betrayal is uncovered, trust slowly begins to rebuild between Lyka's unit and Jonathan. Some soldiers still view him with suspicion, but they can't deny that he saved them from further catastrophe. The base commander even begins to reconsider Jonathan's position, offering him a chance to officially work with the army as an independent advisor. Jonathan, however, is hesitant. He has been a commander, a prisoner, and now a man in a no-man's land. He doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere. But Lyka, standing by his side, assures him that wherever he chooses to be, she'll be there. "Stay," she tells him one night as they sit under the stars, her head resting against his shoulder. "We can fight this war together." He gazes at her, knowing that she has become his anchor, his reason to keep going. "I'm not used to fighting on the right side of things," he says with a wry smile. Lyka looks up at him, her eyes full of warmth and hope. "Maybe this is the right side. Maybe you just hadn't found it before." They share a quiet kiss, the stars above them flickering like distant dreams yet to be realized. But for now, in this moment, they have each other, and that's all that matters. With Jonathan now working as part of the army's operations, the tension around them eases, though the war outside rages on. Lyka and Jonathan continue to fight side by side, taking on dangerous missions together, proving their loyalty to each other both on and off the battlefield. Their relationship becomes a symbol of something more: hope in the midst of destruction and love where hatred once stood. But as the war escalates, Lyka begins to feel the weight of her responsibilities pulling her in different directions. Can she continue to be the sniper everyone depends on while navigating a relationship with a man who was once the enemy? And will Jonathan's past ever truly be behind them? The war is coming to an end, but not without one final battle that threatens to tear everything apart. Jonathan receives word that the insurgents are planning a massive attack that could wipe out the base. Lyka and her team prepare for what could be their last stand. As they gear up for battle, Lyka turns to Jonathan, her heart heavy with fear. "Whatever happens, promise me you'll come back." Jonathan holds her close, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'll always come back to you, Lyka." Together, they head into battle, their hearts entwined with the same goal: to survive and to finally put this war and their pasts behind them. The night before the final battle, the base was eerily quiet. Soldiers moved with a heavy sense of purpose, checking their weapons and equipment, but no one spoke much. Lyka and Jonathan stood in the shadows of the barracks, both of them too aware that the coming day could be their last. For the first time since they met, Lyka felt an overwhelming fear, not of dying, but of losing Jonathan. The thought of never seeing his face again, of him falling in battle, was unbearable. She had faced countless enemies, but this battle felt different. She wasn't just fighting for her life, she was fighting for their future. "You think we'll make it through this?" Lyka asked, her voice quiet, almost lost in the night air. Jonathan turned toward her, his gaze steady but soft. "We've survived worse," he said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "But whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he continued, his voice lower now. "You've made me believe in something more than just war. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that if I survive this, I want to spend that future with you." Tears prickled at Lyka's eyes, but she forced a smile. "You're not getting rid of me that easily, Jonathan." They shared a long kiss, holding onto each other as if the world outside didn't exist. But the war was waiting for them, and as much as they wanted to stay in this moment forever, they knew it was fleeting. Dawn broke with the sound of gunfire echoing in the distance. The enemy was closing in, and every soldier was on high alert. Lyka took her position as the sniper, climbing up to a vantage point overlooking the battlefield, while Jonathan led a small team on the ground. The insurgents attacked with full force, their numbers overwhelming. Explosions shook the ground, and the air was thick with smoke and dust. Lyka's heart pounded as she picked off targets with precision, her sniper rifle an extension of her body. Every shot was a reminder of why she fought: to protect the people she cared about, to ensure that Jonathan made it through this alive. From her vantage point, she could see Jonathan moving with tactical precision, leading his team through enemy fire. His movements were swift and decisive, and for a moment, Lyka felt a surge of pride. But her relief was short-lived. An explosion rocked the ground near Jonathan's team, and through her scope, she saw him go down. Panic gripped her chest. "Jonathan!" she yelled into her radio, but there was no response. She quickly scanned the area, her heart racing as she saw him crawling for cover, blood staining his uniform. He was alive, but barely. Without thinking, Lyka abandoned her position and sprinted down from the sniper nest, dodging bullets as she ran toward him. She didn't care about the danger. Nothing else mattered except getting to him. When she reached him, Jonathan was unconscious but breathing. She quickly checked his injuries, a shrapnel wound to his side, deep but not fatal. She grabbed his arm, hoisting him up with all the strength she had. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely, pulling him toward cover. The battle raged around them as Lyka dragged Jonathan to safety, her mind racing with fear. She couldn't lose him. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. She applied pressure to his wound, her hands trembling as she tried to keep him from slipping away. The world around them was chaos. Gunfire, explosions, the screams of soldiers, but Lyka's focus was entirely on Jonathan. As she worked to stop the bleeding, Jonathan stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He winced in pain but managed a weak smile. "You came for me." "I'll always come for you," Lyka replied, her voice thick with emotion. Jonathan's hand reached up, resting on her cheek. "You're my reason to keep fighting," he whispered. his voice barely audible over the din of battle. Lyka's throat tightened, and she nodded. "We're going to get out of this. Together." With the help of a nearby medic, they stabilized Jonathan's condition, but the battle was far from over. Lyka couldn't leave his side, but she knew her duty. She picked up her rifle again, positioning herself to defend both Jonathan and the other soldiers fighting around them. Every shot she fired was for him, for the future they had talked about, for the chance to finally leave the war behind. Hours passed, but it felt like days. The insurgents kept pushing, their numbers seemingly endless. But slowly, the tide of the battle began to turn. Reinforcements arrived, pushing back the enemy forces. Lyka's aim never faltered, every shot precise and deadly. She was a force of nature, fueled by the need to protect the man she loved. As the sun began to set, the sounds of gunfire finally started to die down. The insurgents were retreating, their forces decimated. The base had held, and the battle was over. Lyka, exhausted but relieved, lowered her rifle and turned back to Jonathan, who was still resting, his breathing more stable now. She knelt beside him, her hand brushing his hair back gently. "We made it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We survived." Jonathan smiled weakly, reaching out to take her hand. "I knew we would." In the days that followed, the base began to recover from the battle. Soldiers mourned the losses of their comrades, but there was also a sense of victory in the air. The war was nearing its end, and peace was finally within reach. Jonathan's injuries required time to heal, and Lyka stayed by his side every step of the way. She refused to leave him, her own heart healing alongside his body. They had faced death together and come out stronger on the other side. One evening, as Jonathan lay in the recovery ward, Lyka sat beside him, her hand resting on his. "I don't know what happens next," Lyka admitted, her voice soft, "but I know I want to face it with you." Jonathan squeezed her hand, his eyes full of the love and gratitude he felt for her. "Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." As the war officially came to an end, Lyka and Jonathan stood together on the outskirts of the base, watching the sunrise. The world was quiet now, the chaos of battle behind them. They had both given so much to the war, but now it was time to rebuild, to find peace, not just in the world around them but within themselves. "I've spent my whole life fighting," Jonathan said, his voice thoughtful. "But now, I think it's time to start living." Lyka smiled, leaning into him. "We've earned that." Together, they walked away from the base, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future had in store for them. Their journey had been one of pain, loss, and redemption, but through it all, they had found something more powerful than any weapon: love. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.